Hey everybody, welcome back to Down and Dirty Modding. Today we are going to be doing the flexible lines on our CPU loop in our Fractal R4 here. There's a lot of information about flexible tubing and how you do the runs that I could go over. I think I get rattly and rambly when I start talking about it. There's just so much to cover in detail that I'm going to try to just gloss over the top of it. And if you have questions, make sure you leave them in the comments. Or if you want, say, a video that covers a lot of the flexible tubing on its own without dealing with routing it in a case or anything, maybe we can do a separate video on that. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to take our Fractal here. We've got our CPU block in it, our reservoir, the CPU block mounted to the motherboard. The reservoir and the radiators that we just did, everything's in here. I threw the GPU in and the RAM to make sure that when I'm running my lines, I don't run something that's going to interfere with them later. Let's say I get a bad stick of RAM somewhere down the line, let's hope not, and I have to swap one out. Well, I don't want to have to drain the whole loop to change a stick of RAM. So you want to keep some of that stuff in mind. Also with the GPU, you want to be able to yank it out and upgrade, because that's what we all do. We want to upgrade our GPU. So you don't want to have like four lines wrapped around it to where you can't get to it. So we have those in there so we can keep an eye on how things are working with those. I do have all my fittings put in. I think this is how it's going to run. A big thing about doing tubing that I found, and the same with wiring, and the same with a lot of modding in general, is don't get too set. Don't get it in your head that something has to run a certain way. A lot of times this stuff runs, you can come up with an idea of how you want it to run and stay pretty close to it, or even stay right on it. But at some point in time, you're going to run into a problem where your idea does not match up with the reality of the case, and rather than sit there for days and days and days fighting it, sometimes you just have to make a slight change and get on with it and get it done. And it usually isn't a big issue. It may be how you route a line somewhere, or how something bends or angles or whatnot. But just be aware that sometimes you've got to make some changes on the fly, and if you do that, life is simple and easy to work. This stuff isn't going to be stressful then. So that's that. The tubing we've got is Primochill's half-inch OD by 3/8 ID Advanced LRT. Not getting paid to use their tubing. I bought this on my own, but I do like it. I've used it in a few builds. I've never had trouble with it. I thought it had pretty good clarity on their clear tubing, and I think the first time I actually used Flex, I used this white, and it came out pretty nice. So I don't want to mess with what's working, so I've gone back to the old standby, or not the old standby. It's not really a standby. It's just what I normally use. The fittings I've got are some Monsoon barbed fittings. These are super nice. I've used them in a previous build, so I had them laying around. I do like Monsoon. They have just nice stuff, and it's got a good look to it, and it's got a nice color. So these are also 3/8 by half-inch OD fittings. That's a very important thing whenever you're picking Flex out, is to match your tubing size with your fitting size. And that's important with hardline as well. I mean, you just want to make sure everything matches up right. Otherwise, you're going to have leaks and just a hard time. This stuff comes in clear, it comes in colors, opaque or translucent. You can pick whatever you want depending on your build. We're going to use clear because we're going to throw some dye in this sucker, and we want a nice color going through all of our lines. So we want to be able to see it. So we use clear. Working with the tubing, let me cover that real quick so you know what I'm going to be doing. Basically, this stuff is hold it up close, like we're going to run from the outlet of our CPU, and it just slides onto the barb, and we're going to run to the inlet of our radiators. So what we do is basically take that cap off as well, hold it up, get a good measurement. I really didn't want to put that on that tight, and then we just cut it. Scissors work very well for this. They give you a pretty nice clean cut. You can also use a razor knife. Not as good of an option. It is kind of more difficult to get a nice clean edge with one of these. Or you can use tubing cutters. Now these are a set of hardline cutters that I've got for doing PETG, but they also work on flex lines as well. They also make the standard tubing cutters for like plumbing that you'll get at your hardware store. Those work great on this stuff, especially if they're new and sharp. Dull ones, you're going to hate life, but these basically just pushes the razor through it. You get a nice clean edge. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do is take you over to the workbench. We're going to look a little more closely at our fittings, and then we'll start measuring out and putting some tubing in, and I'll try to get you a good vantage point of that. So let's go ahead and move over there and continue on. All right, so we're at the bench. We're getting ready to start putting our fittings and our tubing between our fittings. But let's take a look at our fittings a little bit. Now these are, like I said, Monsoon's barbed fittings. Basically it's a base with an O-ring on it that they actually give you extras, nice, with a cap, and that cap just screws on. The barbs will keep the tubing from sliding off. The caps actually compress it down on that ring to give it some resistance. You're never going to have enough pressure to pop one of these off. You should never have enough pressure to pop one of these off, but having that cap there makes sure. So that's basically how that goes. You know, you would slide the cap on, push it on the barb. I really need to clean this fitting a little better. Push it on the barb, slide the cap up, and just screw them together. Now Monsoon has a tool to help you with all of this, tightening everything down. They've got basically a two-tooth little piece that will lock onto their caps and help you spin them. And then the barb itself has a couple of grooves in it that, oh man, this stuff sticks pretty good on the barb. That's good. Basically, the end of their barb has a couple of notches that their other side of their tool works in. You want to tighten stuff down, but you don't want to tighten it too tight, especially on acrylic, because acrylic tends to break and crack whenever you tighten stuff down too tight. Basically finger tight, and I like to give it just a little bit more. So kind of like an oil filter, well, except for the 3/4 of a turn. But finger tight, and I just give it a little bit, maybe an 1/8 of a turn, a 1/16 of a turn, something to snug it down just a hair bit more. Now that has got me in trouble, so I will give you a warning here. I don't always do this right. I've broken a couple of blocks, which luckily haven't leaked, but you know, after you pull them apart and you see all the cracking around the fittings from me over tightening them, always be careful. Definitely a lot of people say finger tight and that's it. I agree with them, but I like things tighter than finger tight, so that's me. I don't think that's going to come back off. Well, whatever. But that's basically how your fittings go together. We are using a T, and it's a rotary T. So basically when it's screwed in and this is tight, it still turns. Hence, rotary. Did I say a rotary T? I meant a rotary 90. But that'll let us get some sharper turns in. Basically it's going to screw in, and then you're going to screw your fittings into the end of that. Snug it down, tighten it up, whatnot. So that's the basic of the fittings. Everyone has a slightly different way of tightening things down, but normally a lot of them have a tool. I think mainly the tools for getting things apart, but I like I said, just to tighten things up a little bit extra, because I'm more afraid of stuff falling apart than I am of breaking some of these parts. Probably should be the other way around. So let's work on running some of the tubing in the case. Our first run, let's start with our reservoir. We're going to take it from the fitting back here, which is very, very hard to see because it's behind our GPU, but it's a 90 basically with a fitting looking up. We're going to take it over to our CPU block on the inlet side, and it is marked on EK blocks with an N, so IN. So what we're going to do is take our tubing, get one of the ends of it, hopefully, maybe. And this is never pretty when I do it. Take our cap off down here. I'm going to just kind of hold it close and eyeball what I think I need. Cut it off. Make sure I got a decent cut. Now I should be able to put a couple of caps on this. Slide these onto our barb and we'll have a good fitting. Now what I'm going to do is put it on this reservoir one first, and that way I can kind of hold it up over on the CPU block and see if I need to trim a little extra off. But I always cut them, like I said, I like cutting them a little bit long and then looking at it while it's there, just because, you know, you might be able to take a 1/4 inch off and make it work better or look better. It's all going to work the same. So we're going to tighten that and down. And the GPU is really in the way, like horribly bad. Another thing the wrenches are good for is if you're in a spot where you can't really get your fingers on it to get it finger tight, you can use the wrench. That's a lot of times what I use them for. Okay, so I'm going to kind of eyeball that. See, it sticks out a little bit if I were to put it on now. So I really can cut like a 1/2 inch or so off of this and pull it back. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I think that's more like a 3/4 of an inch. See, and I think that's going to look it doesn't make a huge difference, but I think it looks a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on the barb. Slide our cap on. Finger tighten that bad boy down. There you go. There's our first run. The only bad thing about using the rotaries is sometimes this fitting doesn't go exactly where you want. I'm hoping it stays about where it's at, but it can slide forward. There may be something where we have to take some tape on the backside or maybe some super glue or something to dab on it, just to kind of hold it in the position that I want it. Normally it's not too big of an issue, but with flex everything's kind of movable, so that happens. What now? Well, next we'll go from the block over to our radiator, and we'll go ahead and do the same thing, kind of eyeball that as far as how we think we're going to run it. And throw caps on. I'm going to go ahead and, let's see, I think I'm going to go ahead and put it on the block and cut on this side. And we'll just leave that one solid. And that's not happy. That cap wanted to get a little sticky. Okay. The threads got a little, I don't know if they were gunked up or something. So it unscrews, screws back in, and we'll tighten that down. And then we'll come over here and say, I mean, obviously we can cut quite a bit off of this one. My method does give you a little bit of waste of tubing, but you know, the stuff's cheap, and boy, it's always better to cut pipe long and cut it down than cut short and waste that whole piece. They still haven't developed that pipe stretcher that plumbers always joke about. So we'll go ahead and tighten this one down. And basically that's it for tubing, for doing flex tubing, guys. It's super easy. And it's really something I think you all should just, if you want to get into water cooling, this is a good spot to jump in a good way, because it is very easy. It's one of those things where I think if you see it and see how easy it actually is, it's one you can kind of be like, oh yeah, I can do that. And it really is one of those things. Almost anyone can do this. It's not difficult at all. So I'm going to go ahead and probably fast forward through doing the rest of this, and then we'll meet back up and see what it looks like. Alright guys, there you go. Case is done, loop is in. Next up, we would be filling the loop normally, but I really wanted to do a video on filling the loop, this loop, but I've also got to take it all apart so I can paint the case and do other mods. So I'm going to be putting that video off. Maybe if I get something else going where I'm filling the loop, I will make a video using that case. Otherwise, this one will wait till it's closer to the end, so that I'm not having to put it apart, fill it, take it apart, drain it, whatever, all this extra work. I know that sucks for you, but it makes my life easier. Hopefully it makes it easier for me to get videos out. Talking about the loop, I've got a few things I want to say about it. You know, you will notice that I did switch over to a 90 down here at the bottom. That's part of that adjusting on the fly. The straight fitting I was wanting to use was going to look, in my eyes, bad. So I went ahead and switched over to a 90. It made putting it together a little easier, and also I think it's going to make the look a little better in the long run. Also, you'll notice I was tightening things down with a wrench at the end. Not that I was cranking down on things and making them super tight. My fingers just got tired, so I used the wrench because it was easier on my hands. So nothing here is super tight, just my hand got tired. Another thing about loops in general is a good idea is to plan a drain valve and possibly a fill port in from the beginning. Now I have it on this one because I typically don't bother with them because I'm more about what it looks like and not the maintenance. And I'm pretty good about stringing stuff together to get it drained out. But if you're doing this system that you're going to be using for the next 2 or 3 years, whatnot, upgrade it as you go, you're not going to want to have to take it and jerry-rig a bunch of stuff to get it drained out. You want to just hit that valve, drain the system out, put new fluid in, and go on with your life. Drain valves make that very, very easy. So figuring one in from the beginning, say whether or not it's a T on one of these lines, or it's a fitting that comes off of, say, this extra fill port we have, that will make your life so much easier when it comes to maintaining your system yearly that it's definitely worth looking into. Same with the fill port. You can easily fill this without the fill port, but having a spot up on top where you can just pour something into it would make life a whole lot easier. So Those are things to look into when you're designing your system. But like I said, they're not necessary. It just makes life easier. So I guess that's all I've got for today. If you've got any questions, leave them down in the comments. Anything about like the tubing or the fittings or what order things should run in. I know those come up a lot. Go ahead and ask them down in the comments. There are no dumb questions in water cooling. There's just stuff that you haven't learned yet. So that's what we're here for, to teach you all the ins and outs. And if you've got something, hopefully you'll point something out and everybody will be scratching their heads and we'll figure it out. If I don't know it, I will definitely try to point you in the right direction. So don't be afraid to ask any questions down there. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you want to see what comes next, hit subscribe. That all standard thing. So that's all I've got. So I will talk to you all next time. So get out there and mod something.